Four professional killers received their assignment on a Monday afternoon. The target was Bumpy Johnson. The contract came from Lucky Luciano himself, the highest levels of the Italian mob. The fee was substantial, $20,000. Split four ways. The plan was sophisticated, well-researched, backed by intelligence from multiple sources. It should have been straightforward. Wait for Bumpy at his usual location. Box him in. Eliminate him quickly. Disappear before anyone could respond. Professional work. Clean execution. No complications. Except none of them understood who they were actually hunting. By Wednesday morning, 3 of the hitmen were dead. The 4th was running. Terrified. Broken. Begging Lucky Luciano to call off a contract that had already destroyed his crew. This is the story of how Bumpy Johnson didn't just survive an assassination attempt. He turned it into a demonstration. A lesson. A message so brutal that even Lucky Luciano had to acknowledge what he'd unleashed. New York in 1948 was a city divided by invisible borders. The Italian mafia controlled most of Manhattan. The docks. The unions. The rackets that generated millions annually. At the center of this empire sat Lucky Luciano. Even from exile in Italy, his influence remained absolute. His word was law. His decisions shaped the underworld across America. But Harlem was different. Harlem had Bumpy Johnson. By 1948, Bumpy had been running his operation for nearly 2 decades. Numbers racket, policy banks, nightclubs. He'd built an empire that rivaled the Italian families in profitability. And he'd done it independently, without permission, without tribute. The relationship between Bumpy and the Italians had always been complicated. Mutual respect mixed with territorial tension. They tolerated his independence because forcing the issue would be expensive, would create instability, would potentially unite Harlem against outside interference. But tolerance wasn't acceptance. And Lucky Luciano was a man who believed in order, in hierarchy, in the proper structure of organized crime. From his perspective, Bumpy was an anomaly. A talented operator who'd carved out territory through intelligence and ruthlessness. But still an outsider. Still black. Still operating in a system designed to keep him subordinate. The breaking point came over expansion. Bumpy had been moving beyond Harlem. Establishing operations in the Bronx. Making connections in Brooklyn. Building partnerships that threatened Italian monopolies. It wasn't aggressive. Wasn't hostile. Just business. But to Luciano, it was a challenge. A test of whether the established order still mattered. Whether someone like Bumpy could be allowed to grow unchecked. He called a meeting of his most trusted advisors. Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, Albert Anastasia. They discussed the Bumpy problem. Some argued for negotiation, for bringing him into the fold, for recognizing his value and making him an official partner. Others wanted immediate action, wanted him eliminated before he became too powerful to control. Luciano listened, considered, made his decision. We send a message, not through negotiation, through action. We show him and everyone watching that there are limits, lines you don't cross. The contract was issued. 4 hitmen were selected, not random soldiers, professionals, men who'd handled difficult targets before, who understood the importance of this particular job. The team leader was a man named Vincent Coll, no relation to the famous Mad Dog Coll who'd died years earlier. This Vincent was methodical, patient, known for successful executions that looked like accidents or robberies gone wrong. His 3 partners were equally qualified. Tommy Russo, a shooter with dozens of confirmed kills. Carlo Benedetti, an expert at surveillance and planning. And James, Jimmy the Cleaner Moran, specialist in making bodies disappear. Together, they represented the best the Italian mob could deploy. The best chance of eliminating Bumpy Johnson cleanly and permanently. They were given 2 weeks to study their target, to learn his patterns, to identify vulnerabilities, to plan the perfect hit. They were thorough, documented Bumpy's routines, mapped his regular locations, identified his security, built profiles of his associates. By the end of the first week, they had a plan. Bumpy ate dinner every Tuesday at Jock's place, a restaurant on 135th Street. He always arrived between 7 and 8, always sat at the same table, always had 2 bodyguards with him. The plan was to hit him as he left, in the street, when he was between his bodyguards and his car. Vulnerable, exposed. 3 shooters would open fire simultaneously. The 4th would drive the getaway car. Quick, professional, over in seconds. What they didn't know was that Bumpy had been expecting something like this for months, that he had informants inside the Italian families, that he knew about the contract before the hitmen received their assignment, that everything they'd observed about his routine was theater, carefully staged, designed to make them confident, to make them predictable, to turn their own plan into a trap. The surveillance began on a Monday. Vincent Coll positioned his team around Harlem. Each man assigned specific observation points, specific times, specific details to document. Tommy Russo watched Bumpy's brownstone, noted when he left, when he returned, who visited, who stayed. Carlo Benedetti covered the restaurants, the clubs, the business locations, tracked movement patterns, identified security protocols. Jimmy Moran handled the backup surveillance, the secondary locations, the places Bumpy went when he thought no one was watching. They were professional, careful, used different vehicles, changed positions regularly, avoided patterns that might alert their target. By Wednesday, they had a comprehensive picture, or so they thought. Bumpy's routine seemed consistent, predictable. He left his brownstone every morning around 9, visited his numbers operation on 132nd Street, had lunch at different locations, but always in Harlem, then dinner at Jock's place every Tuesday. Like clockwork, Vincent reviewed their findings, looked for anomalies, for signs that Bumpy suspected surveillance. Found nothing. The target appeared comfortable, unaware, operating normally. "This is almost too easy," Tommy said during a planning meeting. Vincent nodded. "He's gotten comfortable, been operating without real challenges for years. Made him sloppy." It was exactly what they wanted to believe. That Bumpy Johnson, for all his reputation, was just another target, just another job. But while they watched Bumpy, Bumpy's network was watching them. Jericho had spotted the surveillance on day 1. Different car parked across from the brownstone. Same driver for 3 hours. Amateur mistake. He reported it to Bumpy immediately. "We got company. White guys. Professional looking. They're watching the house." Bumpy smiled. "Good. Let them watch. Make sure everything looks normal. I want them confident." Over the next week, Bumpy's entire organization played their parts, maintained routines, acted oblivious, made the surveillance easy, made the hitmen believe they were invisible. Meanwhile, Bumpy's people were conducting counter-surveillance, following the followers, identifying them, learning their patterns, building profiles. By the end of the first week, Bumpy knew everything. Vincent Coll, team leader, lived in Little Italy, drove a black Oldsmobile, had a girlfriend in the Bronx, visited her every Thursday. Tommy Russo, the shooter, apartment in Astoria, frequented a bar on Steinway Street, always sat at the end, always drank whiskey. Carlo Benedetti, the planner, family man, house in Queens, 2 kids, wife who didn't know what he did for a living. Jimmy Moran, the cleaner, lived alone, paranoid, changed apartments every few months. Currently in a building on the Lower East Side. Bumpy assembled his inner circle, laid out what he knew. Lucky sent professionals. 4 of them. "They've been watching us for a week, building a plan." Jericho leaned forward. "We hit them first. Take them out before they can move." Bumpy shook his head. "That starts a war." Lucky would have to respond. Would escalate until everyone's bleeding. Willie, another of Bumpy's lieutenants, spoke up. "So what do we do?" "Let them come." "We let them think they're coming," Bumpy said. "We let them finalize their plan. Get confident. Commit to their approach. Then we turn it against them." He explained his strategy. It was risky, required perfect timing, required trust that his people would execute flawlessly. But it was the only way to send the right message. Not just to the hitmen, to Lucky Luciano himself. The second week of surveillance confirmed the hitman's plan. Tuesday night, Jock's place. Hit Bumpy as he left the restaurant. They scouted the location repeatedly, identified firing positions, planned escape routes, timed everything down to the second. Vincent was satisfied. "Tuesday, we end this. Everyone clear on their positions." The team nodded. They'd done this before. Multiple times. Never failed. No reason this should be different. On Monday night, Bumpy held a final meeting. Tomorrow, they make their move. Everything has to be perfect. Timing, positioning, everything. If one person is off, this fails. His team understood. They'd been preparing for a week, knew their roles, trusted the plan. Tuesday arrived. The hitmen were in position by 6 o'clock. Vincent in the getaway car, engine running, parked 2 blocks from the restaurant. Tommy on a rooftop across the street. Clear line of sight to the restaurant exit. High-powered rifle. Suppressor attached. Carlo in a doorway. Close range. Shotgun under his coat. Backup in case Tommy missed. Jimmy near the corner. Watching for police. Ready to signal if complications arose. They waited. Professional. Patient. Confident. At 7:15, Bumpy's car pulled up to Jock's place. He stepped out. 2 bodyguards with him. Just like every Tuesday. They walked inside. The hitmen confirmed positions. Checked weapons. Reviewed signals. Everything was ready. Inside the restaurant, Bumpy sat at his usual table. Ordered his usual meal. Talked with the owner. Everything normal. Everything expected. Except the bodyguards weren't his usual men. They were his best. Combat veterans. Men who'd seen action in World War II. Who understood tactics. Who could handle what was coming. And throughout the restaurant, 8 more of Bumpy's men were positioned. Blending in. Appearing to be regular customers. But armed. Ready. Waiting. At 8 o'clock, Bumpy paid his bill. Stood. Headed toward the door. This was it. The moment the hitmen had been waiting for. Tommy sighted his rifle. Carlo's hand moved to his shotgun. Jimmy signaled, all clear. Vincent revved the engine slightly. Ready for quick escape. Bumpy stepped out of the restaurant. Into the street. Between his bodyguards and his car. Exactly where the plan predicted. Tommy's finger touched the trigger. And then everything changed. The moment Bumpy stepped into the street, car doors opened. Not from Vincent's getaway car. From vehicles positioned at both ends of the block. 6 men emerged. All armed. All moving with military precision. Tommy saw them through his scope. Confusion hit first. Then panic. These weren't random pedestrians. They were operators. Moving to cut off escape routes. He swung his rifle toward them. Tried to acquire a target. But they were already behind cover. Already positioned. Already waiting. Carlo saw them too. Recognized immediately that the situation had flipped. They weren't ambushing Bumpy. They were the ones being ambushed. He looked toward Vincent. Toward the getaway car. Saw more men approaching from behind. Blocking their exit. Abort. Carlo hissed into his radio. It's a setup. Abort now. But it was too late for that. Vincent tried to reverse. To back out of the trap. His car lurched backward. Directly into a truck that hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. Blocking him. Trapping him. Men appeared from the truck. Surrounded Vincent's car. He reached for his gun. Hands grabbed the door. Yanked it open. He was pulled out. Onto the street. Disarmed in seconds. On the rooftop, Tommy made a decision. Forget the target. Survive. He abandoned the rifle. Moved toward the roof access. Toward stairs that led down. Toward escape. But the door opened before he reached it. 2 of Bumpy's men emerged. Tommy froze. Trapped on the roof. No weapon. No exit. Nowhere to go. Carlo ran. Dropped the shotgun. Sprinted toward an alley. Toward darkness. Toward any chance of escape. He made it 20 feet. Then someone stepped out in front of him. Jericho. Massive. Unmovable. Carlo tried to change direction. Too slow. Jericho's fist connected with his face. Carlo dropped. Unconscious before he hit the ground. Jimmy saw all of this unfold. Saw his team captured in less than a minute. Every instinct screamed run. He turned. Walked quickly away from the scene. Trying to blend in. Trying to disappear. He made it 2 blocks. Then a car pulled alongside him. The back door opened. Willie sat inside. Gun pointed. Not threatening. Just informative. Get in. Or I shoot you here. Your choice. Jimmy got in. The whole operation had collapsed in under 3 minutes. For professional hitmen. Carefully planned ambush. Executed with precision. And all of them were now prisoners. Captured by the man they'd come to kill. They were taken to a warehouse in the Bronx. Separated. Each put in a different room. Unable to communicate. Unable to coordinate. Alone with their fear. Vincent was first. Brought into a space where Bumpy waited. Sitting calmly. Like he was conducting a business meeting. You're Vincent Coll, Bumpy said. Statement. Not question. Vincent said nothing. Evaluated his options. Found none. Lucky Luciano sent you. $20,000 contract. Split 4 ways. You've been watching me for 2 weeks. Vincent's face showed surprise. How did Bumpy know the specifics? How did he know the amount? The timeline? I know everything, Bumpy continued. Reading his expression. I knew about the contract before you did. Knew you were watching from day one. Knew your plan before you finalized it. He leaned forward. You were never hunting me. I was allowing you to think you were. There's a difference. Vincent found his voice. Lucky will send more. Killing us doesn't solve your problem. Bumpy smiled. Who said anything about killing you? That confused Vincent. In his world, captured hitmen died. Always. No exceptions. You're going to deliver a message, Bumpy said. To Lucky. From me. About respect. About boundaries. About what happens when you send amateurs to do professional work. We're not amateurs, Vincent said. Pride overriding survival instinct. Then you should have known better. Should have questioned why everything seemed so easy. Should have wondered why your target was so predictable. Should have done better reconnaissance. Bumpy stood, walked around Vincent. Let the silence build. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Lucky. Tonight. You're going to tell him the hit failed. That 3 of your team are dead. That you barely escaped. That Bumpy Johnson knew everything. That the contract is canceled. Vincent shook his head. He'll never accept that. He'll send someone else. Or come himself. No, he won't. Because you're going to explain exactly how outmatched you were. How I knew every move. How I could have killed all 4 of you before you even tried. But chose not to. Chose to send a message instead. He paused. Lucky's smart. He'll understand. This isn't about who's tougher. It's about who's smarter. And tonight proved who that is. In another room, Tommy was being shown photographs. His apartment. His bar. His routine. Every detail of his life. Documented. Exposed. We could have taken you any time, Willie explained. At home. At the bar. While you slept. But we waited. Because the boss wanted you to understand something. Tommy looked at the photos. At the evidence of how thoroughly they'd been monitored. What, he managed. That you were never in control. That every moment you spent watching us, we were watching you. That you were part of a plan you didn't even know existed. Carlo and Jimmy received similar education. Shown evidence of their own surveillance. Shown how completely they'd been compromised. How easily they could have been eliminated. How mercy was a choice. Not weakness. By midnight, all 4 hitmen understood. They hadn't failed because of bad luck. They'd failed because they'd been playing a game where the rules were rigged against them from the start. Where their target had more information. Better preparation. Superior strategy. Vincent made the call. To Lucky Luciano. In Italy. The conversation was brief. Humiliating. Lucky listened. Asked pointed questions. Confirmed details. Then made his decision. Withdraw. All of you. The contract is canceled. Vincent felt relief. Then confusion. What about Bumpy? Lucky's voice was cold. I'll handle Bumpy differently. This approach was a mistake. One I won't repeat. The call ended. Vincent looked at Bumpy. He agreed. We're done. Bumpy nodded. 3 of you are done. Permanently. One of you gets to walk away. Gets to tell the story. Gets to make sure everyone knows what happened here. The room went silent. Vincent understood. Who? You decide. You're the leader. You live with the choice. It was cruel. Brilliant. Forcing Vincent to select which of his team died. Making him complicit in their execution. Making him carry that guilt forever. Vincent looked at Bumpy. Saw no mercy there. No negotiation. Just certainty. Vincent made his choice in 30 seconds. Tommy. Carlo. Jimmy. 3 names. 3 deaths. The words came out hollow. Mechanical. Because what else could he do? Bumpy nodded. Showed no emotion. Just acceptance of the inevitable. Take them, he told his men. The 3 condemned hitmen were led away. Separately. To different rooms. They didn't resist. Didn't beg. Professional to the end. Understanding that in their world, this was how things concluded. Vincent was left alone with Bumpy. The weight of his decision crushing him. You'll live with this, Bumpy said quietly. Every day. Every time you close your eyes. You'll see their faces. Hear their voices. Remember that you chose. Vincent's hands shook. You gave me no choice. I gave you the only choice that mattered. Your life or theirs. You picked yourself. That's honest. That's survival. But it's also something you'll carry forever. Bumpy walked to the door. Paused. When you talk to Lucky again. When you explain what happened here. Make sure he understands. This wasn't about violence. It was about intelligence. About knowing your enemy better than they know themselves. About preparation. About turning someone's plan into their own trap. He opened the door. You're free to go. There's a car outside. It'll take you anywhere you want. Leave New York. Leave the life. Or stay and remember every day what happened when you came for me. Vincent stood. His legs barely supported him. He walked past Bumpy. Out into the night. Into the car that waited. He never saw what happened to his team. Never knew the details. Just knew they were gone. That he'd sentenced them. That he'd survived by sacrificing them. The car drove him to Penn Station. He bought a ticket to Chicago, left that same night, never returned to New York, never spoke to Lucky Luciano again, just disappeared into a different city, a different life, carrying the guilt. In the warehouse, Tommy Russo was brought to a final room. Bumpy stood there. So did Jericho. And 5 other men. Tommy knew what this was. An execution, but professional, quick, respectful in its own way. You got anything to say? Bumpy asked. Tommy shook his head. What was there to say? He'd taken the job, known the risks, lost the gamble. Jericho stepped forward. Single shot. Behind the ear. Tommy dropped. Dead before he registered pain. Professional. Clean. The way he'd killed others. Carlo Benedetti was next. He tried to negotiate. Offered information. Offered to work for Bumpy. Offered anything that might extend his life. Bumpy listened, then shook his head. You made your choice when you accepted the contract. When you spent 2 weeks planning my death. When you positioned yourself to kill me. There's no walking back from that. Carlo's execution was identical. Quick. Final. Merciful in its efficiency. Jimmy Moran was last. He didn't speak. Didn't plead. Just looked at Bumpy with something close to respect. You were always 3 moves ahead, Jimmy said. We never had a chance. Bumpy nodded. No, you didn't. But you were good. Professional. In another situation, you might have succeeded. But not against someone who knew you were coming. Jimmy smiled slightly. Lesson learned. Too late, but learned. His execution was the same. 1 shot. Immediate. 3 bodies. 3 professionals who'd come to Harlem thinking they were hunters. Discovering too late they were prey. Bumpy's men handled disposal. Professional. Thorough. The bodies would never be found. Never connected to anything. Just 3 more people who disappeared in New York. Forgotten except by those who knew. The message was complete. Lucky Luciano had sent 4 hitmen. Only 1 survived. Not through skill. Not through luck. Through mercy that came with a price. The price of knowing he'd lived because 3 others died. Because he'd made that choice. Because Bumpy Johnson had wanted a messenger more than a body count. News reached Lucky within 24 hours. The full story. How completely his team had been compromised. How thoroughly Bumpy had controlled the situation. How 3 professionals had died and 1 had been sent home broken. Lucky sat in his Italian villa. Considered his options. Considered sending more men. Considered escalating. Then made the intelligent choice. He called Frank Costello. In New York. Gave new instructions. No more contracts on Bumpy Johnson. The situation is resolved differently. We acknowledge his territory. We respect his operation. We don't interfere. Costello was surprised. He killed 3 of our people. He killed 3 people I sent to kill him. That's different. That's self-defense. That's him being smarter than us. I can respect that. Lucky paused. Tell him. Tell Bumpy there's no more conflict. We tried. He won. Now we move forward. It was unprecedented. The most powerful mob boss in America backing down. Acknowledging defeat. Accepting that someone had outmaneuvered him. But Lucky hadn't survived by being stubborn. He'd survived by being practical. And practically, continuing this fight would cost more than any possible gain. Frank Costello delivered the message in person. Drove to Harlem. To Bumpy's brownstone. An unprecedented move. The top Italian mob boss coming to black territory. Alone. Without guards. It was a statement. Bumpy received him in his office. Offered him a drink. They sat like businessmen. Not enemies. Not even rivals. Just professionals. Lucky called off the contract, Costello said. Officially. Permanently. You've made your point. Bumpy sipped his whiskey. Said nothing. Waited. 3 dead. 1 destroyed. That's a hell of a statement. A hell of a message. The families heard it. Loud and clear. Costello leaned forward. But now we need to talk about what comes next. About how we coexist without this happening again. Bumpy finally spoke. Lucky sent professionals to kill me. In my own neighborhood. In my own territory. That's not a business dispute. That's a declaration of war. It was, Costello agreed. And you won. Decisively. Now the question is whether you want peace or continued conflict. I've always wanted peace. I've never expanded aggressively. Never challenged the families directly. Never tried to take what wasn't mine. Lucky decided I was a problem. Lucky was wrong. Costello nodded. He knows that now, which is why I'm here. To propose a formal arrangement. Recognition of your territory. Your operations. Your independence. In exchange, you respect our boundaries. Our operations. Our interests. It was everything Bumpy had wanted. Official recognition. Legitimacy within the underworld hierarchy. The respect he'd always deserved but never received. And if I say no? Bumpy asked. If I decide Lucky's apology isn't enough? Costello's expression didn't change. Then we're back to war. Except this time, it won't be for Hitmen. It'll be full mobilization. Every family, every resource. We'll burn Harlem down to get to you. It was honest. Brutal. The reality of their situation. Bumpy could win battles. But he couldn't win a war against the entire Italian mob. Not without destroying everything he'd built. I accept, Bumpy said. On one condition. This arrangement gets documented. Not legally, but through our channels. So everyone knows. So there's no confusion. So nobody tries this again thinking they can succeed where Lucky failed. Costello extended his hand. Agreed. You have my word. And Lucky's. They shook. Two men from different worlds. Different backgrounds. Different colors. Finding common ground through mutual respect earned the hard way. After Costello left, Bumpy sat alone. Thought about the three bodies. The one survivor. The message sent. The peace achieved. It was victory. But it came with weight. 3 men dead. Not because they'd wronged him personally, but because they'd accepted a contract. Because they'd tried to do their job. Because they'd been caught in a conflict between powers larger than themselves. Jericho entered. Costello's gone. Everything's settled. Bumpy nodded. It's over. Lucky backed down. We've got recognition. Official territory. The families won't interfere. That's good. That's what we wanted. It cost 3 lives. 3 people who came to kill you. Who would have succeeded if you hadn't been smarter? You feel bad about that. Bumpy considered the question. No, but I recognize what it means. That we're at a level now where this kind of thing happens. Where conflicts resolve through calculated violence. Where mercy is strategic, not moral. That's always been the game, Jericho said. You're just playing it better than anyone else. Maybe. Or maybe Bumpy had just gotten lucky. Had informants in the right places. Had made the right choices at the right moments. Had turned what should have been his death into his greatest victory. The next day, word spread through the underworld. Bumpy Johnson had survived Lucky Luciano's hit. Had killed 3 hitmen. Had broken the 4th. Had forced Lucky himself to call off the contract. Had won recognition from the most powerful criminal organization in America. The story grew with each telling. Details added. Exaggerated. Transformed from fact to legend. But the core remained true. Lucky sent 4. Only 1 came back. And that 1 came back broken. It changed everything. Other mob bosses looked at Bumpy differently. With more respect. More caution. More understanding that he operated at their level. Young black criminals saw possibility. Saw that the Italian monopoly on power wasn't absolute. Saw that intelligence and preparation could overcome institutional advantages. Law enforcement took notice. FBI agents added pages to Bumpy's file. Noted his strategic capabilities. His network. His ability to outmaneuver professional killers. Marked him as a Tier 1 target. But for now, there was peace. Hard won. Blood-bought. Built on 3 bodies and 1 broken man's guilt. Peace that would last for years. Because everyone understood. You don't come for Bumpy Johnson. Not anymore. Not after Lucky learned that lesson the expensive way. The months following the failed hit brought stability Harlem hadn't seen in years. The Italian families honored their agreement. No incursions. No challenges. No attempts to muscle into Bumpy's territory. The invisible borders became solid. Respected. Enforced by mutual understanding rather than constant conflict. Bumpy's operations flourished. The numbers racket expanded. New clubs opened. Legitimate businesses provided cover for illegal profits. Money flowed steadily. Predictably. Without interference. But the 3 bodies haunted him in unexpected ways. Not guilt exactly. More like recognition. Recognition that he'd crossed a threshold. That the game had changed. That future conflicts would follow this template. Calculate. Prepare. Execute. Show no mercy. Vincent Coll never recovered. He tried building a new life in Chicago. Found work with a local crew. Small jobs. Nothing like what he'd done before. But the story followed him. Whispers about the Bumpy Johnson job. About how his entire team died. About how he'd been the only survivor. Other criminals looked at him differently. Some with suspicion, wondering if he'd sold out his team. Others with contempt, seeing him as damaged goods. Bad luck. Within a year, he'd left the life entirely. Took a job in construction. Married. had kids, lived quietly. But every night, he saw their faces. Tommy, Carlo, Jimmy, heard Bumpy's voice giving him the choice. Felt the weight of 3 deaths he'd authorized. He died in 1973. Heart attack. His wife found letters he'd written but never sent to the families of his dead crew, apologizing, explaining, trying to make sense of a choice that had no good answer. Lucky Luciano never publicly acknowledged the failure, never discussed it in recorded conversations, never admitted that Bumpy Johnson had beaten him. But privately, he adjusted his thinking, began treating Bumpy as an equal, someone to negotiate with rather than eliminate, someone whose intelligence matched his own. In 1950, Lucky sent word through Costello, an invitation to meet. In Cuba, neutral territory, a conversation between peers. Bumpy considered it. The risk, the opportunity, the statement it would make. He went. They met in Havana, in a private room at a casino Lucky partially owned. 2 of the most powerful criminals in America, sitting across from each other, talking business. The thing in 48, Lucky said eventually. That was my mistake. I underestimated you. Thought sending professionals would be enough. Bumpy said nothing. Let Lucky continue. I should have understood. Should have recognized you were operating at a different level. Should have approached it differently. You should have left it alone, Bumpy said. I wasn't challenging you. Wasn't taking anything that was yours. Just building in my own space. Lucky nodded. Pride. That's what it was. Pride that someone was succeeding without asking permission, without paying tribute, without acknowledging the hierarchy. He paused, sipped his drink. I've learned since then. Learned that hierarchies matter less than results. That the color of a man's skin matters less than the quality of his thinking. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was acknowledgement. Recognition. The closest Lucky Luciano would ever come to admitting error. They talked for 3 hours. About opportunities. About partnerships. About how they could both benefit from cooperation rather than conflict. When it ended, they shook hands. Not friends, but no longer enemies. Associates. Bound by mutual interest and hard-won respect. Back in Harlem, life continued. Bumpy mentored the next generation. Taught them the lessons from 1948. About preparation. About intelligence. About turning enemies' plans against them. Nicky Barnes listened. Absorbed. Would later use similar tactics in his own rise. Frank Lucas paid attention too, though he'd focus more on the violence than the strategy, missing the nuance. Malcolm X heard the stories. Saw parallels in his own struggle. Different battlefields. Different methods. But similar principles. Know your enemy. Prepare thoroughly. Strike decisively. The warehouse where the executions happened was sold in 1952. Became a textile factory. The new owners never knew about its history. About the 3 men who died there. About the message sent in blood. Only Bumpy's inner circle knew the exact details. And they never spoke of it. Not to outsiders. Not to law enforcement. Not to anyone who didn't need to know. It became legend without evidence. Story without documentation. Truth that existed in memory and reputation rather than records. By 1968, 20 years after the failed hit, the story had transformed into myth. People told different versions. Some claimed all 4 hitmen died. Others said Bumpy killed them personally. A few insisted Lucky Luciano had come to Harlem to apologize in person. The truth was simpler, more brutal, more human. 4 professionals accepted a contract. 3 died because they underestimated their target. 1 lived because Bumpy needed a messenger more than a 4th body. That survivor carried guilt heavier than any prison sentence. Bumpy Johnson died that July. Heart attack. On a Harlem street he'd protected for 40 years. His funeral drew thousands. From every corner of his world. The families sent representatives. Costello came personally. Paid his respects. Acknowledged what Bumpy had built. What he'd defended. What he'd proven. In the crowd stood an older white man. Watching from a distance. Not approaching. Not speaking. Vincent Coll had returned. One final time. To see the man who'd spared his life. Who'd given him 2 decades he wouldn't have had otherwise. Who'd taught him the cost of survival. After the service, he disappeared. Back to his quiet life. His family who never knew his history. His nights filled with ghosts who never aged. The story of Lucky's 4 hitmen became a teaching tool. A parable told in social clubs and prison yards. About preparation. About intelligence. About the difference between being dangerous and being smart. Young criminals studied it. Tried to extract lessons. Most focused on the wrong parts. On the violence. On the bodies. On the fear. The real lesson was subtler. About information. About patience. About understanding that the best victories come from knowing what your enemy will do before they do it. About turning traps into counter-traps. About winning before the fight starts. Law enforcement studied it too. FBI profiles of Bumpy grew thicker. More detailed. More respectful. They recognized what the criminal world already knew. That Bumpy Johnson operated at a level most gangsters never reached. That he combined street instincts with strategic thinking. That he'd survived decades in a world designed to kill people like him. The warehouse district where it happened was demolished in 1975. Urban renewal. The city building new projects. Erasing old histories. But the story remained. Passed down through generations. From fathers to sons. From mentors to students. From those who remembered to those who needed to know. In 1985, a young filmmaker interviewed former Harlem residents. Collecting oral histories. An old man told him about Bumpy Johnson. About the night Lucky Luciano sent hitmen. About how only one survived. The filmmaker asked for details. Names. Dates. Evidence. The old man smiled. Shook his head. Some stories aren't meant to be proven. They're meant to be remembered. To teach. To remind people that intelligence beats violence. That preparation beats surprise. That knowing yourself and knowing your enemy means you'll never lose. The interview was never published. The film was never made. But the conversation was recorded. Archived. Preserved for historians who'd study this era decades later. By 2025, Bumpy Johnson had been dead for 57 years. The people who knew him personally were mostly gone. The witnesses had died. The participants had disappeared. But the story lived. In books. In documentaries. In conversations between people who understood that history wasn't just about what happened. It was about what it meant. The Four Hitmen story meant something specific. It meant that systems designed to suppress could be beaten. That institutional advantages weren't absolute. That one person, properly prepared, properly motivated, properly intelligent, could defeat organizations that seemed invincible. It meant that Lucky Luciano, for all his power, had limits. That those limits included a black gangster from Harlem who refused to accept his assigned place. Who built an empire anyway. Who defended it successfully. Who earned respect the hardest way possible. The one survivor, Vincent Coll, died in 1973. But his letters survived. Found by his daughter after his death. She read them. Learned about her father's past. About the choice he'd made. About the 3 men who died so he could live. She burned the letters. Just like Bumpy had burned that photograph decades earlier. Some truths didn't need documentation. Just memory. Just understanding. Just the knowledge that her father had lived with consequences every day. That survival came with prices. That mercy was complicated. The 3 who died left no records. No graves. No evidence they'd ever existed beyond mob archives and fading memories. But they were remembered. By Vincent, every night until he died. By Bumpy, who understood what their deaths meant. By the underworld, which learned from their failure. Their legacy wasn't their deaths. It was the lesson their deaths taught. Don't underestimate intelligence. Don't assume you're the hunter. Don't think preparation is optional. Don't believe reputation is enough. And most importantly, don't come for Bumpy Johnson unless you're absolutely certain you know what you're walking into. Because Lucky Luciano sent 4 professionals. Only one survived their own plan. And that one spent 25 years wishing he hadn't.